You live inside a system designed to preserve control while appearing competitive. And if you think it belongs to history, you miss the fact that it is operating on you. In 1870, a 31-year-old man in Cleveland, Ohio, controlled 4% of America's oil refining capacity. By 1880, he controlled 90%. And by 1904, he controlled 91% of oil production and 85% of final sales. His name was John D. Rockefeller, and the company he built was broken up in 1911, but the method he created was not. It is already inside the ordinary things you think are neutral. The gasoline you pump, the drugs you buy, the tech platforms you use, the food you eat, and the banks you borrow from. None of it exists outside the method Rockefeller proved could dominate an industry and survive the government response designed to stop it. Vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, regulatory capture, and tax-exempt foundations shaping policy are not museum terms. They are operating procedures inside the modern economy. Rockefeller did not simply build an oil empire and leave a footprint. He built the architecture of modern corporate control. And meaningful exit from that architecture becomes increasingly expensive. The system is not Standard Oil as a single company. The system is the method. And the method has been replicated by dominant corporations for more than 150 years. Once the system becomes method, opting out stops being a clean action and becomes a cost you keep paying. The moment you accept that one comfortable assumption collapses, you are not watching an old monopoly punished by a competent state and sealed safely in the past. You are watching a method that learned how to survive punishment by turning punishment itself into a wealth event. That method now sits inside modern corporate law, tax codes, and regulatory systems, and it does not need your attention to keep working. It only needs institutions to trade future flexibility for present survival, one constrained decision at a time. That trade has a downstream consequence because every fix that works today costs more tomorrow when it spends the easy options first. Across retail, search, pharmaceuticals, and finance, the dominant firms converge toward the same method. They all learned from the same blueprint. Control the supply chain vertically. Eliminate competitors horizontally. Capture regulators. Use philanthropy to buy legitimacy. And when government finally breaks you up, ensure the pieces you still control become worth more than the whole you lost. That is not theory. It is the sequence Rockefeller ran, and it is the sequence you will watch lock into place step by step until the conclusion stops feeling like opinion and starts feeling inevitable. Once the sequence locks, the next move is never undo. It is rearrange. To understand why, you have to go back to the man who first proved the method worked. John Davidson Rockefeller was born July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York. And the forces shaping him were not subtle, because his father was a traveling con man selling fake cancer cures, while his mother was a devout Baptist. He grew up with ruthlessness on one side and moral certainty on the other. And instead of canceling each other out, they fused into a worldview where destroying competitors without mercy could coexist with the belief that God had chosen him to organize industry for humanity's benefit. In Rockefeller's mind, that was not hypocrisy, but justification, removing internal brakes. If monopoly represented order, then opposition was not merely competition, but disorder requiring correction. With internal brakes removed, the next constraint became simple, because he could not tolerate chaos as a permanent condition, and therefore had to replace it. In 1859, oil was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and the oil rush began. Thousands of prospectors flooded into western Pennsylvania to drill. Fortunes were made and lost overnight, and the industry behaved less like a business than a stampede, swinging between overproduction, collapsing prices, and shortages sending them spiking again. Rockefeller was 20 years old then, working as a bookkeeper in Cleveland, and he watched the chaos the way an accountant watches bleeding, not as drama, but as inefficiency begging for control. He saw opportunity, but not in drilling, because drilling was volatile, risky, and dependent on luck. Instead, Rockefeller chose the steadier choke point, because refining crude oil into kerosene for lamps was the real business. Once he made that decision, he stopped needing the ground to cooperate. Owning the choke point meant the next thing that became impossible was winning through patience. Because anyone could drill, but only one player could own the bottleneck. In 1863, Rockefeller invested $4,000 in his first refinery in Cleveland, and within 2 years, it was the largest refinery in the city. That should have been victory, except Cleveland had 30 refineries, and the environment was ruthless. Competition was fierce, margins were thin, and most refineries operated at the edge of bankruptcy, which meant competing better did not guarantee survival, but only a longer fight. Rockefeller did not want a longer fight. He wanted the fight to end. Ending the fight required removing the possibility that rivals could operate independently on the same inputs, which is where the method began forming its first hard shape. Instead of competing on price like everyone else, he changed the terrain so the war could not be fought fairly. Vertical integration became his lever. Most refineries simply bought crude oil, refined it, and sold kerosene to distributors, while controlling only one step and paying someone else for everything surrounding it. Rockefeller decided every step that once generated profit for someone else would become a step inside his own machine. He bought barrel factories so he would not need to buy barrels, acquired tank cars, negotiated rail relationships, purchased storage facilities, and built distribution networks selling directly to consumers. As each layer moved inside his control, competitors did not merely lose margin, they lost options, because every uncontrolled step functioned like a toll booth, extracting cost and preserving breathing room. Rockefeller pulled each payment inward and converted the savings into pressure he could apply externally. External suppliers prioritized Rockefeller's volume, which created advantages that did not depend on luck or market kindness. While competitors paid 25 cents per barrel for containers, Rockefeller could produce them for 15. While competitors paid railroads to ship oil, Rockefeller negotiated secret rebates and owned the tank cars themselves, so railroads effectively paid him to ship while charging his competitors higher rates. Shared infrastructure became a tilted playing field, and once the field tilts, product quality stops deciding the outcome. With shipping turned into a gate, competitors lost the ability to wait him out because time itself became a cost they could not finance. Rockefeller now possessed the most dangerous capability in competitive markets, which is the ability to sell below cost while still making profit. That capability does not simply win customers, it erases rivals. He dropped kerosene prices to levels that bankrupted competitors, while his integrated structure absorbed the pressure. Once below cost, selling becomes repeatable. The idea of a peaceful market filled with small players disappears. In 1870, Rockefeller formed the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, and although his refining capacity had grown into the largest operation in the world, he still controlled only 4% of American refining, which to him was not an achievement but a ceiling. The next phase locked the method into place through horizontal integration. If vertical integration means controlling the supply chain, Then horizontal integration means buying or destroying every competitor until the word competitor loses meaning. In 1872, Rockefeller launched what historians later called the Cleveland Massacre, when he approached every refinery owner in Cleveland and offered to buy their operations. Those who accepted received fair market value and often managerial roles inside Standard Oil, while those who refused faced a price war where kerosene dropped below cost. Unable to match Rockefeller's production cost, they lost money on every sale, and the longer they resisted, the faster their finances collapsed. They had two options: sell or go bankrupt. Most sold, a few resisted, and all eventually lost. Within 3 months, Rockefeller controlled 25 of Cleveland's 26 refineries and jumped from 4% to 25% of American refining capacity. That moment closed a door that never reopened, which was the belief that fragmented markets naturally persist. Once the blueprint worked in Cleveland, it could work anywhere because the method was portable. Offer to buy, and if refusal comes, destroy the economics, then acquire the ruins. It was not a single massacre, but a strategy that could operate in any city or industry, as long as the cost advantage remained large enough. Rockefeller had already built that advantage through vertical integration, which allowed him to expand horizontally without weakening himself. The next step eliminated the possibility of a national market built from independent local players. Through the 1870s, Standard Oil expanded across New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and beyond, using the same sequence. Because railroad rebates lowered Rockefeller's shipping costs, vertical integration kept production costs lowest, and ruthless price wars eliminated firms refusing to sell. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled 90% of American refining capacity. At that scale, the structure became impossible to ignore. A monopoly always faces two problems: legality and public hatred. Because monopolies eventually become illegal, and hatred converts into political pressure. The Sherman Antitrust Act, passed in 1890, specifically targeted monopolies like Standard Oil, and Rockefeller himself became the most hated industrialist in America. But by the time the public recognized the scale of his power, he had already built something more durable than a company, because he had built a structure. Once legal pressure arrived, the next constraint appeared immediately, because controlling a monopoly through a single exposed corporation becomes dangerous when that corporation can be attacked directly. Rockefeller solved the problem by redesigning the legal structure itself. If the law can strike a company, the solution is to build something that is not technically a company. The trust became that invention. In 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers created the Standard Oil Trust, and individual Standard Oil companies transferred their stock into the trust, so control moved upward into a holding structure owning companies but not operating refineries or selling oil itself. 41 shareholders, led by Rockefeller, controlled the trust, while the trust controlled the companies and the monopoly gained armor. This structure became the template copied by the Sugar Trust, the Tobacco Trust, and the Steel Trust. The innovation was not scale, but separation of ownership from operations. Because when control sits above operating companies, regulators cannot collapse the system by targeting a single entity. The trust functioned as the ancestor of the modern holding company, producing nothing, yet controlling everything beneath it. The structure survives today in corporations like Berkshire Hathaway, Alphabet, and Amazon, which are not identical to Standard Oil, but inherit the same strategic move. When wealth anchors to structure, attacking a visible company stops being enough because ownership survives operational surgery. By 1904, Standard Oil controlled 91% of oil refining and 85% of final sales, while Rockefeller's personal fortune approached $900 million, which would later equal roughly $400 billion in modern value. Public pressure intensified as investigative journalism exposed Standard Oil's tactics, and political momentum built toward intervention. In 1911, the United States Supreme Court ordered the breakup of Standard Oil into 34 separate companies, and the operating monopoly was dismantled. But Rockefeller still owned shares in the new entities, including companies that would become Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, and later divisions absorbed into BP. Instead of losing wealth, Rockefeller watched his holdings multiply because, before the breakup, Standard Oil stock traded near $600 per share, and afterward, the combined value exceeded $2,000 per share. The breakup, intended to weaken Rockefeller, actually increased his fortune because the company disappeared, but the ownership architecture remained intact. That moment revealed the defining property of modern corporate power, which is resilience through reorganization. Over the following century, many of the separated companies quietly merged again, including Exxon with Mobil and Chevron absorbing other descendants. Fragmentation delayed consolidation, but never eliminated it. Standard Oil as a company died, but the method survived. Vertical integration spread across industries, while horizontal consolidation became a standard growth strategy. Trust structures evolved into holding companies, regulatory influence hardened into lobbying networks, and philanthropy evolved into foundations shaping public institutions. These mechanisms were never tied to oil. They were tied to control. Amazon reflects Rockefeller's vertical integration strategy because retail alone does not guarantee dominance. So Amazon built warehouses, logistics fleets, payment systems, and cloud infrastructure through Amazon Web Services. Competitors now operate on infrastructure owned by the same company competing with them, which means controlling the supply chain removes supplier power. Horizontal consolidation followed through acquisitions like Whole Foods, Zappos, Twitch, Ring, and MGM. When acquisition fails, replication and undercutting follow, because third-party sellers provide data allowing Amazon to identify profitable products and launch competing versions promoted above the originals. Google reorganized under Alphabet, which is a holding company controlling dozens of subsidiaries, including YouTube, Waymo, DeepMind, and Verily. The structure shields operations, optimizes taxes across jurisdictions, and complicates regulatory action, which makes it the trust updated for the digital age. Pharmaceutical companies replicate regulatory capture by funding portions of the agencies that regulate them, while lobbying for patent protections extending market control. The financial sector mirrors the holding company model through institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Citigroup. After the 2008 crisis, regulations increased, but the complexity of corporate structures diffused direct accountability, which means the separation Rockefeller introduced in 1882 still defines modern finance. Then there is philanthropy. In 1913, Rockefeller created the Rockefeller Foundation with an initial gift exceeding $7 billion in modern value, which publicly funded education and medical research, but structurally preserved influence over institutions shaping public policy. Funding directs research priorities, research defines standards, and standards influence markets. Modern billionaire philanthropy follows the same model through foundations such as the Gates Foundation and the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative. Business concentrates wealth, while philanthropy shapes the environment where that wealth operates. Today, the Rockefeller system appears everywhere because fuel flows through descendants of Standard Oil. Retail distribution runs through Amazon's network. Information flows through Google, and financial transactions pass through holding company banks. Each interaction appears independent, yet structurally they share lineage. The system persists because it is efficient. Standard Oil reduced kerosene prices dramatically. Amazon delivers goods in days, and Google retrieves information instantly. Efficiency benefits consumers while simultaneously concentrating capital, because lower prices and convenience coexist with growing ownership concentration. Over a lifetime, everyday spending channels enormous value toward consolidated firms operating under Rockefeller's method, while extraction remains incremental and diffuse, and accumulation compounds steadily. Escape is not prevented by force, but discouraged by structure. Rockefeller differed from industrialists like Carnegie and Vanderbilt because he created a system rather than a single empire. Factories age and railroads fragment, but systems adapt. Vertical integration became doctrine. The trust became the holding company. Lobbying institutionalized regulatory influence, and foundations institutionalized philanthropy. When Rockefeller died in 1937, the method no longer required its creator because it had embedded itself in corporate governance. Rockefeller believed competition was wasteful and that consolidation created efficiency and order. And that belief continues shaping corporate strategy today. Modern industries converge toward a handful of dominant players, including Amazon in retail infrastructure, Google in search, Meta in social media, Exxon, Chevron, and BP in energy, Pfizer, Merck, and Johnson & Johnson in pharmaceuticals, and J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and Citigroup in banking. Each merger reduces independent actors and raises barriers to entry. The convergence is not coordinated, but structural. The Rockefeller system is not a company, but a pattern repeated across industries, including vertical integration, horizontal consolidation, corporate trusts, regulatory capture, and philanthropic influence. It began with oil and expanded across steel, railroads, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, technology, and finance, and now defines the architecture of the modern economy. You cannot boycott the system because it does not exist as a single entity you can refuse. You can only recognize the pattern. Recognition changes perception, but not structure. John D. Rockefeller built a system you cannot escape, and that system is the modern economy. You live inside it every day. Welcome to Rockefellers.